Playing with Power MTG. Powerful cards, powerful formats. Before we begin tonight's game, I wanted to ask a question. Do you have extra cards lying around that you don't use? Want to buy or trade for some extra cards but don't know how to maximize the value? Then you should try out today's sponsor, Card Conduit. Card Conduit is the best service when it comes to selling your extra cards. Don't waste hours trying to find the best buy list price for your cards online. Simply send them to Card Conduit and let them take care of the rest. I've used Card Conduit multiple times already. I always use them for getting the best value of my extra cards and my extra bulk. I get fair prices for my cards and they save me tons of time. They have three main services. Their standard service lets you send them unsorted cards of any value. They will sort, grade, and give you the best price for your cards, including your bulk. Their curated service is similar. Send them your unsorted cards worth over $1 in value. They will charge half of the fee of standard service and then charge no fee per card. Their new sorted service is a great value as well. Choose cards in advance with their selection tool, send them sorted to Card Conduit, and they will grade and buy list them automatically. Save yourself the time of having to send to multiple sites and let Card Conduit do it instead. Their fee is only 2% with no fee per card. So give Card Conduit a try today. If you sign up with my link in the description below or use the promo code POWER, you will also get 10% off of their fees when you use their service. A big thanks to Card Conduit for sponsoring today's video. Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have Ashani, piloting the partner pair of Malcolm Keen-Eyed Navigator and Vial Smasher the Fierce. This deck, called Dark Malcolm, is a Grixis Adnos list that tries to resolve wheels for value and win through Underworld Breach. Ashani's opening hand contains a Flooded Strand, Mox Diamond, Soul Ring, Bolas's Citadel, Cavern of Souls, and his London Mulligans are Winds of Rebuke and a Lotus Petal. Next, we have a special guest. Dawn, an original member of the Playing with Power crew all the way back when the channel started, has joined us for a game this evening. Dawn is piloting Zur, the Enchanter. This is a stacks deck that slowly uses its commander to lock down the table before executing a Rest in Peace Helm of Obedience combo. Dawn's opening hand contains a Vampiric Tutor, Winter Orb, Brainstorm, Rest in Peace, Cavern of Souls, Flooded Strand, and Averted Catacombs. After that, we have our Mox Pearl patron Sean, piloting the partner pair of Pure Imaginative Rascal and Toothy Imaginary Friend. This is a storm deck using Displacer Kitten for value before winning through Laboratory Maniac. Sean's opening hand contains a Grim Monolith, Laboratory Maniac, March of Swirling Mist, Talisman of Curiosity, Emergence Zone, Misty Rainforest, and an Ancient Tomb. Finally, we have our Mox Pearl patron Chad, piloting Sidisi, Brood Tyrant. This is a deck that attempts to mill its entire library and execute the 4 Horsemen combo. Chad's opening hand contains a Spellseeker, Island, March of Swirling Mist, Rhystic Study, Ancient Tomb, Bayou, and his London Mulligan is a Dark Ritual. Without further ado, let's kick off this really reasonable Resonating Rebellion. Ashani opened a Black Lotus in his Magic 30 booster pack and gets to start us off. Ashani draws a card for turn and plays a Cavern of Souls, naming Pirate as it enters. He casts a Mox Diamond, discarding a Flooded Strand. He casts a Soul Ring. He casts his commander, Malcolm Keen-Eyed Navigator. Ashani passes. Dawn draws a card for turn and plays a Verdant Catacombs. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. Dawn passes. Sean draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. He taps it to help cast a Grim Monolith. Sean ends his turn. Chad draws and plays an Island. He casts a Mana Vault. He ships the turn. Ashani draws and moves to combat. He attacks Dawn with Malcolm. Dawn takes it and Malcolm triggers. Ashani creates a treasure, and in his second main phase, he plays a Marsh Flats. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Badlands onto the battlefield. He casts his other commander, Vial Smasher the Fierce. In response, Dawn casts Brainstorm. He draws 3 and puts 2 back on top. Vial Smasher resolves, and Ashani passes to Dawn. Dawn draws and plays a Flooded Strand. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Tundra onto the battlefield. He passes. Sean draws and plays a Misty Rainforest. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Tropical Island onto the battlefield. He taps his Ancient Tomb to cast Talisman of Curiosity. He casts his commander, Toothy Imaginary Friend. Sean gives the turn to Chad. Chad draws and plays a Bayou. He casts a Felwar Stone. He casts Rhystic Study. In response, Dawn casts Mana Drain, countering Rhystic. Finished up, Chad passes. Ashani draws and casts Diabolic Intent, sacrificing Vial Smasher as an additional cost. He fetches up a card into his hand. He casts Glenhorn Buccaneer. He moves to combat, and in response, Sean taps his Talisman to help cast March of Swirling Mist, exiling a blue card, phasing out both Malcolm and Glenhorn. In his second main phase, he plays a Mana Confluence for turn. Plans disrupted, Ashani passes. Dawn draws, and in his first main phase, he adds 3 colorless through Mana Drain. He plays a Cavern of Souls, naming Human as it enters. He casts his commander, Zur the Enchanter. Dawn ships the turn to Sean. During its upkeep, Sean casts Mystical Tutor. In response, Dawn pays 2 life to cast Mental Misstep, countering Tutor. Sean draws, Toothy triggers, and gets a +1/+1 counter. He plays an Emergence Zone and passes the turn. Chad draws and plays an Ancient Tomb. He taps his Ancient Tomb to cast Spellseeker. It enters, and Chad fetches up a Veil of Summer into his hand. Chad ends his turn. Ashani's creatures phase in. Ashani draws and moves straight to combat. In response, Chad casts his own March of Swirling Mist, phasing out Malcolm again. Then Ashani attacks Chad with Glinthorn. Chad takes it, and in his second main phase, Ashani taps his Mana Confluence to cast Bolus's Citadel. In response, Sean taps his Talisman to cast an Offer You Can't Refuse. Citadel is countered, and Ashani creates 2 treasures. Plans disrupted again, Ashani ends his turn. Dawn draws and moves to combat. He attacks Ashani with Zur. Zur triggers, and Dawn fetches up a Grasp of Fate onto the battlefield. It enters and exiles Ashani's Glinthorn, Sean's Toothy, and Chad's Mana Vault. Sean puts Toothy into the command zone, then Toothy triggers, and Sean draws. Then Ashani takes the hit. Next, Dawn plays a Scrubland for turn. He casts Rest in Peace. It enters and exiles all graveyards. Finished up, Dawn passes. Sean draws and plays an Otawara Soaring City. He taps his Ancient Tomb to recast his commander, Toothy Imaginary Friend. Sean passes. At the end of Sean's turn, Ashani casts Vampiric Tutor. In response, Dawn casts Dispel, countering Tutor. The turn moves to Chad. Chad draws and plays an Overgrown Tomb, into play tapped. He passes. Ashani's creatures phase in. Ashani draws and moves to combat. He attacks Sean with Malcolm. Sean takes it, Malcolm triggers, and Ashani creates a treasure. In his second main phase, Ashani recasts his commander, Vial Smasher the Fierce. Ashani passes to Dawn. At the end of Ashani's turn, Dawn casts Vampiric Tutor. In response, Chad casts Veil of Summer to draw into interaction. Veil resolves and Chad draws. He also cycles Zagoth Triumph, drawing a card. With no other answers, Tutor resolves. Dawn fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. The turn moves to Dawn. Dawn draws and moves to combat. He attacks Sean with Zur. Zur triggers, and Dawn fetches up a Necropotence onto the battlefield. Then Sean takes the hit. In his second main phase, Dawn plays a Godless Shrine into play untapped, paying 2 life. He casts Helm of Obedience. This is game over for the team, so in response, Ashani casts an Offer You Can't Refuse. Vial Smasher triggers and deals 1 to Chad. With no responses, Offer counters Helm, and Dawn creates 2 treasures. Dawn activates Necropotence 6 times, paying 6 life and exiling 6 cards. He moves to his end step and puts the Necro cards into his hand. With a full grip of 7, Dawn passes. Sean draws, Toothy triggers, and gets a counter. In his main phase, Sean casts Opt. He scries 1 and draws a card. Toothy triggers and gets another counter. He casts Brainstorm. He draws 3 and puts 2 back on top. Toothy triggers and gets 3 counters. He plays a Verdant Catacombs for turn. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Breeding Pool onto the battlefield untapped, paying 2 life. He taps his Ancient Tomb to help cast his other commander, Pier, Imaginative Rascal. In response, Dawn casts Counterspell, countering Pier. Sean moves to combat and attacks Dawn with Toothy. Dawn takes 6, and Sean gives the turn to Chad. Chad draws and plays a Ponder. He looks at the top 3, doesn't like what he sees, shuffles, and draws. With nothing else to do, Chad passes. Ashani draws and moves straight to combat. He attacks Sean with Malcolm and Vial Smasher. Sean takes it, Malcolm triggers, and Ashani creates a treasure. Ashani passes. At the end of Ashani's turn, Chad hard casts Force of Vigor, targeting Necropotence and Rest in Peace. In response, Dawn activates Necropotence 8 times, paying 8 life and exiling 8 cards. Then both are destroyed, and the turn moves to Dawn. Dawn draws and casts Imperial Armor, attached to Zur. He moves to combat and attacks Sean with Zur. Zur triggers, and Dawn fetches up a Mana Vortex onto the battlefield. Then Sean takes 7, and in his second main phase, Dawn plays his Windswept Teeth. He casts a Mana Crypt. He cracks his Windswept Teeth, pays a life, and fetches up a Plains onto the battlefield. He casts Aura of Silence. He casts a Mana Vault. Dawn moves to his end step and puts the Necro cards into his hand. He passes, discarding to hand size. During his upkeep, Sean sacrifices Otawara to Mana Vortex. He draws, Toothy triggers, and gets a counter. He moves to combat and attacks Dawn with Toothy. Dawn takes 7, and in his second main phase, Sean casts Eldritch Evolution, sacrificing Toothy as an additional cost. Toothy triggers, and in response, Chad casts Worldly Tutor. He fetches up a Gilded Drake onto the top of his library. Then Toothy's trigger resolves, and Sean draws 6 cards. Then Eldritch resolves, and Sean fetches up a Displacer Kitten onto the battlefield. Sean taps his Ancient Tomb and his Talisman to cast Frantic Search. Kitten triggers, and Sean flickers Grim Monolith. He then draws 2, discards 2, and untaps 3 lands. He casts Mox Opal, paying the extra for Aura of Silence. Kitten triggers and flickers Grim Monolith again. He casts Crumb Mox, paying the extra. Kitten triggers and flickers Grim Monolith again. It enters, and Sean imprints Mindbreak Trap. Sean casts Eternal Witness. It enters, and Sean returns Frantic Search to his hand. He taps his Ancient Tomb to cast Frantic Search. Kitten triggers, and Sean flickers Mox Opal. He draws 2, discards 2, and untaps 3 lands. He plays an Exotic Orchard for turn. He casts Chain of Vapor, targeting his Mox Opal. Kitten triggers, targeting Eternal Witness. In response, Dawn casts Force of Negation, exiling a blue card, countering and exiling Chain of Vapor. Then Kitten flickers Eternal Witness, Witness triggers, and Sean returns Frantic Search to his hand. He casts Frantic Search. Kitten triggers, and Sean flickers Grim Monolith. He draws 2, discards 2, and untaps 3 lands. He casts Soul Ring, paying the extra for Aura of Silence. Kitten triggers and Sean flickers Eternal Witness. Witness enters and Sean returns Frantic Search to his hand. Then Soul Ring enters. He taps his Ancient Tomb to cast his commander, Toothy, Imaginary Friend. He casts Frantic Search. Kitten triggers and he flickers Grim Monolith. He draws 2, discards 2, and untaps 3 lands again. Toothy triggers twice and gets 2 counters. Unfortunately, out of cards in hand, he cannot do anything else and has to pass. During his upkeep, Chad sacrifices a land through Mana Vortex. He draws and plays a Takenuma, Abandoned Mire as his land for turn. He taps his Ancient Tomb to cast his commander, Sidisi, Brood Tyrant. It enters and Chad mills Kinnan, Bonder Prodigy, Cabal Therapy, and Otawara, Soaring City. Sidisi triggers and Chad creates a 2/2 zombie. He casts Gilded Drake. It enters and Chad exchanges control of Ashani's Malcolm. Finished up, Chad gives the turn to Ashani. During his upkeep, Ashani sacks the land through Mana Vortex. He draws and moves to combat. He attacks Dawn with Gilded Drake. Dawn has no blocks, takes it, and dies. When he dies, Grasp of Fate leaves the battlefield and Chad's Mana Vault and Ashani's Glenhorn re-enter the battlefield. In his second main phase, Ashani casts Gamble. Vial Smasher triggers and deals 1 to Chad. With only 1 card in his hand, Ashani prays to the gods of luck. He fetches up a card into his hand and then randomly discards ad nauseum. Unfortunately, the luck gods were not on his side this time, and Ashani passes the turn. Sean draws, Toothy triggers, and gets a counter. In his main phase, Sean casts his other commander, Pier, Imaginative Rascal. Sean passes. Chad draws and moves to combat. He attacks Sean with Malcolm and Ashani with Sidisi. Sidisi triggers and Chad mills Ulamog the Infinite Gyre, Assassin's Trophy, and Bloodstained Mire. Ulamog triggers and he shuffles his graveyard into his library. Then he creates a 2/2 zombie. Then they both take it, Malcolm triggers, and Chad creates a treasure. All through, Chad passes. Ashani draws and moves to combat. He attacks Sean with Gilded Drake and Glenhorn. In response, Ashani activates Glenhorn, discarding and drawing, and dealing 1 to each opponent. He activates Glenhorn again, discarding and drawing, dealing 1. He does it 1 more time, discarding and drawing, dealing 1. Then Sean takes the hit and dies. Finished up, Ashani passes to Chad. Chad draws and moves to combat. He attacks Ashani with Malcolm and Sidisi. Sidisi triggers, milling 3, including Bridge from Below. Ashani takes it, Malcolm triggers, and Chad creates a treasure. In his second main phase, Chad casts Diabolic Intent, sacrificing a zombie and fetching up a card into his hand. He taps his Ancient Tomb to cast Mesmeric Orb. Chad ends his turn. Ashani untaps, Mesmeric Orb triggers, and Ashani mills 5. He draws and casts Imperial Seal. Vial Smasher triggers and deals 1 to Chad. Ashani then fetches up a card onto the top of his library and loses 2 life. He moves to combat and attacks Chad with Glenhorn. In response, Ashani activates Glenhorn, discarding and drawing, dealing 1 to Chad. Chad then blocks with Spellseeker. Spellseeker dies, Bridge from Below triggers, and Chad creates a zombie. In his second main phase, Ashani casts Underworld Breach. In response, Chad casts Swansong. In response, Ashani casts Pact of Negation. Pact counters Swansong, and Breach resolves. Ashani taps his Mana Confluence to escape Gamble. He fetches up a card into his hand, and since he has no cards in hand, he discards Brain Freeze. He escapes Lotus Petal, and then he cracks it for a blue. He escapes Lotus Petal again, and cracks it for another blue. He escapes Brain Freeze, milling 24. He escapes Lotus Petal 2 more times, and then he escapes Brain Freeze again, milling 33, including a Lion's Eye Diamond this time. He escapes Lion's Eye Diamond. He cracks it for 3 blue. He escapes Brain Freeze, milling the rest of his library. He escapes Thassa's Oracle. It enters, triggers, and Ashani wins the game. Ladies and gentlemen, what a great game tonight. Everyone was pushing each other back and forth, trying to break through and win. Dawn was locking down the board, Sean was storming off, Chad's engines were turning, but in the end, Ashani pulled out the victory. Congrats to Ashani on his win. He was stopped multiple times, but his deck is super resilient. His key was staying patient and recovering properly when interrupted. He did this with expertise and it paid off for him tonight. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see more like this, please consider subscribing. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time when we duke it out to see who will be king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.